My hands tell the story of my life. They are not the soft, manicured hands of a woman who has spent her days at leisure. They are a roadmap of 68 years, marked with the fine white lines of old burns from an oven, the calloused pads from decades gripping a sewing needle, and the faint, silvery tracks of scars from slipped knives while chopping vegetables for 1,000 family meals. My husband, Robert, used to take them in his own rough, mechanic's hands and say, "Alara, these are honest hands. They've built everything that matters." He's been gone 10 years now, but the truth of his words remains. They built a home. They raised 2 children. They held a family together with thread and toil. My daughter, Clara, is like me. Quiet, steady, with a heart that understands the value of things that can't be bought. My son, Leo, was always different. He was born reaching for something more, something shinier than the world Robert and I could give him. He was brilliant, I'll give him that. He studied hard, climbed fast, and I was so proud it felt like a sun was burning in my chest. But with his success came a shadow of shame. Shame for our small, tidy house with its squeaky floorboards. Shame for my simple clothes, sewn by my own hand. Shame for his father's grease-stained fingernails. He loved us, I think, but he loved us from a distance, as if we were a chapter in a book he was eager to finish. When he married Amelia, he married into a different world entirely. The Sinclairs were a family of doctors and lawyers, people who spoke in quiet, modulated tones and lived in houses where the silence itself seemed expensive. They were not unkind to me, not overtly, but I always felt like an exhibit in their home. The working-class mother, I saw how Leo straightened his tie a little tighter, how his laugh became a little louder, a little more forced, whenever they were around. He was performing, and a part of his performance was pretending he had sprung from the earth fully formed, with no humble roots to speak of. A few months ago, Leo and Amelia bought a new house. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement. A sprawling stone and glass structure in a neighborhood where the lawns were greener than any green the first had ever seen. They decided to throw a housewarming party, and the planning was like a military operation. Amelia's parents would be there, along with Leo's colleagues and all their new, important friends. Leo called me a week before. "Mom," he'd said, his voice smooth and practiced. "We're going to be swamped. Could you come and help with the kids? Lily and Tom are so excited to see you." My heart did a familiar little leap. Of course. It was my role, my purpose. I had been their built-in babysitter since Lily was born. I watched them when Leo and Amelia went on weekend trips. I picked them up from school when their nanny was sick. I stayed over whenever a business dinner ran late. I never asked for a penny. It was what a grandmother did. It was what a mother did. It was just help. So I went. For 3 days before the party, I was there. I did the laundry, made sure the children's rooms were spotless, and kept them entertained and out of the way of the caterers and florists who moved through the house like a silent, efficient army. On the day of the party, I bathed them, dressed them in their stiff, new clothes, and kept them happy in the upstairs playroom while the guests arrived downstairs. Later, when the party was in full swing, I brought the children down to say a brief hello. The house was humming with conversations I didn't understand and laughter that didn't sound entirely real. I stood by the grand staircase, a small, invisible island in a sea of tailored suits and silk dresses, holding my grandchildren's hands. Leo was across the room, holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by his new tribe. He looked like a king. Then came the moment that changed everything. Amelia's father, Mr. Sinclair, a tall man with a voice like polished granite, tapped his glass for a toast. He spoke of Leo's incredible drive, his sharp mind, his ambition. "We are so proud to have him in our family," he declared, raising his glass. "A true self-made man." The guests applauded. Leo beamed, his face flushed with pride. He stepped forward to say a few words. He thanked the Sinclairs for their support. He thanked his beautiful wife, and then he looked out over the crowd of smiling faces. His eyes swept right past me, as if I were a piece of furniture, a part of the decor. And then he said the words, "Thank you, everyone. It means so much to us. Amelia and I, we really did this on our own. We built this life from the ground up, with absolutely no help from anyone. It just goes to show what you can achieve when you have to rely on yourself. The words didn't land like a punch. A punch is loud and immediate. This was different. It was like a sliver of ice, sharp and silent, sliding directly into my heart. No help. From anyone. I felt the blood drain from my face. Every late night, every canceled plan, every weekend I had given up, every dollar I had slipped him in his university days when he was too proud to ask, all of it, in that single, public moment, was erased. Wiped clean. I had not just been ignored. I had been rendered non-existent. My breath caught in my chest. I looked at Leo, who was now laughing at something one of his new friends had said. He hadn't even registered what he'd done. Or worse, he had, and he didn't care. In his story, the one he told this new, shiny world, I had no role. I was the inconvenient, unglamorous prologue he had ripped out of the book. I didn't make a scene. My generation wasn't raised to make scenes. We were taught to absorb pain, to swallow pride, to carry on. I saw Lily and Tom starting to get restless, so I quietly led them back upstairs. I put them to bed, read them a story just as I had 100 times before, and tucked them in. Their soft breathing was the only real sound in that enormous, hollow house. Then I found my simple cloth coat, let myself out the back door, and walked to the bus stop in the cold night air, feeling more alone than I had the day Robert died. The next day, the silence in my little house was deafening. Every photograph on the mantelpiece seemed to mock me. There I was, holding a newborn Leo. There, standing proudly between him and Clara at their high school graduation. It was a history he had just publicly disowned. A volcano of grief and anger was burning inside me, but on the surface, I just felt cold. A deep, penetrating cold that had nothing to do with the weather. That afternoon, Clara called. Her voice was tight with anger. Mom, I spoke to a friend who was there last night. She told me what Leo said. There was a pause. I am so sorry. He had no right. It was a monstrous thing to say. Her words were a balm. Just hearing someone else acknowledge the wound made it feel real. It wasn't just my imagination. It wasn't me being overly sensitive. He was just showing off for his new family, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That's no excuse, Clara snapped. That's a reason, not an excuse. Are you okay? I will be, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. After we hung up, I sat at my old wooden kitchen table, the one Robert and I had bought secondhand when we were first married. I stared at my hands, resting on the worn surface. Honest hands. Hands that had built everything. And my son had told the world they had built nothing. It was at that moment, in the quiet of my kitchen, that the volcano inside me stopped burning. The heat receded, and in its place was a core of something hard and clear as diamond. It wasn't anger anymore. It was resolve. He wanted a world where my contributions didn't exist. He wanted a transactional life where everything had a price, but nothing had any real value. Very well, then. I would meet him in that world. I would show him the value of what he had so carelessly erased. I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't cry. I would be as quiet and efficient as the caterers in his new house. I got up and went to the little wooden chest where I keep old papers and memories. I pulled out a stack of calendars from the past 12 years, ever since Lily was born. I found a clean, new ledger book, the kind Robert used to use for his garage accounts. And I began to work. I went through every calendar, page by page. I remembered everything. February 2010, a whole week watching the kids when they both had the flu and Leo and Amelia had a conference in another city. July 2012, every weekend for a month so they could take a second honeymoon, all of 2015, 3 afternoons a week picking them up from school because Amelia's new job had unpredictable hours. The holidays, the summer vacations, the sick days, the date nights. I wrote it all down. Date. Hours. Reason. I didn't do it with rage. I did it with the same methodical precision I used to cut a dress pattern. Each entry was a stitch, sewing my history back into existence. This was not an act of revenge. It was an act of accounting. An act of truth. It took me 2 full days. My hand ached, but it was a good ache. It was the ache of work, the feeling of creating something tangible. When I was done, I had a list that covered more than a decade of my life. Thousands of hours. I looked up the minimum wage for each of those years. I was not a professional nanny, I was a grandmother, so I decided that the lowest legal wage was more than fair. I did the math carefully twice. Then I went to the local library and used their computer to type it all up. I formatted it cleanly, professionally. At the top, in bold letters, it said, "Invoice." Underneath, it listed my name and address and his. The line item read, "For childcare services rendered, January 2010 to November 2022. Below that was the grand total, a number that was both shocking and, I knew, a fraction of what they would have actually paid for that level of constant, reliable care. At the very bottom, in the notes section, I wrote a single sentence: "No payment is due. This is simply a record of the help from no one you received." I printed it on a clean, crisp sheet of white paper, folded it neatly, and placed it in a business envelope. I put a stamp on it and walked to the corner mailbox. As the envelope dropped inside with a soft thud, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. I had taken the narrative of my life back into my own hands. Whatever happened next, I had corrected the record. The truth was now in the mail. 2 days later, my phone rang. The caller ID said Leo. My heart gave a single, hard thump, but my hand was steady as I answered. I didn't speak. "What is this?" he roared, his voice cracking with fury. There was no greeting, no preamble. Just raw, hot rage. What in the world is this supposed to be? An invoice? Are you insane? I remained silent, letting his anger wash over me like a storm I was watching from behind a thick window. "You sent me a bill. A bill? To your own son? After everything I've done for you, you do this to embarrass me? To humiliate me in front of my wife? Everything he had done for me?" The words almost made me laugh. The occasional, dutiful holiday gift? The checks at Christmas that always felt more like a corporate bonus than a present from a loving son? I finally found my voice. It was quiet, much quieter than his, but it was solid. "There is nothing to pay, Leo. It says so at the bottom." "I don't care what it says," he shouted. "This is a hostile, insane thing to do. Amelia found it in the mail. She thinks you've lost your mind. Do you have any idea how this makes me look?" And there it was. Not, "Mom, I'm so sorry I hurt you," not, "I can't believe I said that," only, "How does this make me look?" His world had shrunk to the size of his own reflection. "Leo," I said, and my voice was as clear and cold as the resolve I'd felt in my kitchen. "At your party, in front of all your important friends, you said you had no help from anyone. You looked right through me and erased 12 years of my life. You erased the care I gave your children, my grandchildren. You treated my love like it was worth nothing. So I decided to show you its value in the only language you seem to understand anymore, the language of money." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him processing it, the gears of his mind grinding as he tried to find a way to make this my fault. This is blackmail," he stammered, his voice losing its thunder, replaced by a desperate indignation. "You're trying to make me feel guilty." "No, Leo," I said softly. "I gave up trying to make you feel anything a long time ago. I am simply stating a fact. You received help. A great deal of it. The invoice is the evidence. You don't have to pay it, but you no longer get to deny it. That's all." "So what now?" he asked, his voice suddenly small. "What do you want?" "I want nothing from you, Leo," I said, and the truth of it resonated through my entire body. It was liberating. I just wanted to correct the record. "Goodbye," and I gently hung up the phone. I had not yelled. I had not cried. I had simply held up a mirror, and he had shattered it with his own rage. A week later, I put my little house on the market. It sold faster than I expected. The memories of Robert were everywhere, and they were beautiful, but the more recent ghosts were too loud. I found a small, bright apartment in a senior living community just a few blocks from Clara and her family. It was half the size of my old house, but it felt twice as big because it was filled only with my own future. I used some of the money from the sale to set up a small workshop in the community's activity room. I put up a sign, "The Mending Circle." Learn to sew, repair, and create. All welcome. At first, just a few women came, curious. I taught them how to hem trousers, patch a child's torn jeans, replace a button so it would never fall off again. I didn't charge a fee, only asked for a small donation for materials if they could afford it. Word spread. Soon, the room was full every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. Young mothers from the neighborhood started coming, bringing their children's clothes. I was teaching a skill, yes, but it was more than that. We talked as we worked. We shared stories. It was a community built around the simple, honest act of mending what was broken. I was visible again. My hands were valued. My knowledge was respected. I kept a copy of the invoice. I didn't frame it and hang it on the wall. That would have felt like gloating. I kept it tucked away inside my old sewing box, a box Robert had made for me from polished oak. It was a private document, a declaration of independence. It was a reminder that my worth was not determined by my son's approval, but by the truth of my own labor and love. News of Leo trickled down through Clara. The invoice, as I'd suspected, had caused a cataclysm in his perfect new life. It wasn't the money, it was the story it told. It was proof that he wasn't the self-made man he pretended to be. To the Sinclairs, whose wealth was old and effortless, this story of unpaid family labor was a stain. It was messy. It was common. It punctured the myth of their son-in-law. His marriage, built on the fragile foundation of image and ambition, began to crack under the strain. Amelia, I heard, couldn't look at him the same way. He was no longer the brilliant man who had transcended his origins. He was just a boy who had been cruel to his mother. The respect he had so desperately craved from his in-laws curdled into a kind of pitying condescension. His work began to suffer. A man so consumed with keeping up appearances can't function when the core appearance has been proven false. About a year after what I now thought of as the accounting, my doorbell rang. It was Leo. He looked thinner, and the expensive suit he wore seemed to hang off him, a costume that no longer fit. His eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. He stood awkwardly on my welcome mat, holding a bouquet of flowers that already looked weary. "Mom," he began, his voice raspy. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside and let him into my small, sunlit living room. He looked around at the unfamiliar space, at the cheerful chaos of my sewing projects. "Things have been difficult," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Amelia and I, we're separated. Her parents, they think I'm a source of embarrassment." He finally looked at me, and I saw what he had come for. He wasn't here to apologize for hurting me. He was here because his world had fallen apart, and he was looking for someone to help him glue it back together. He wanted me to retract the truth, to call his in-laws and tell them it was all a misunderstanding, a joke in poor taste. He wanted me to mend his life for him, one more time. I sat down in my favorite armchair and gestured for him to take the small sofa opposite me. "I'm sorry to hear your life is difficult, Leo," I said, and I meant it. I am his mother. I could never truly wish him ill. But your marriage and your in-laws are not my burden to carry. "But you could fix it," he pleaded, leaning forward. "If you just explained." "Explained what?" I asked gently. "That the truth isn't true? That my work had no value? I will not lie for you, Leo." "Not anymore." I saw the hope drain from his face, replaced by a familiar, petulant frustration. But this time, it had no power over me. 6 more months passed. Then one evening, my phone buzzed with a text message from a number I almost didn't recognize. It was Leo. The message was short, stripped of all excuses and blame. It said only this: "I was ashamed of where I came from. I hurt you because of my own weakness. There is no excuse for what I said. I am sorry." I read the words 3 times. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a magic wand that would fix everything. But it was the truth. His truth, finally admitted. I didn't reply. It didn't need a reply. It was an ending and, perhaps, a beginning for him. My peace, I have learned, does not depend on his journey. It is my own. I find it here, in my sunny apartment, in the hum of my sewing machine, in the grateful smiles of the young women at the mending circle. My life is not defined by the son I lost to ambition, but by the community I have built with my own 2 hands. My greatest joy now is my granddaughter, Maya, Clara's little girl. She is 5 years old, a whirlwind of bright energy and fierce love. Last week, she was sitting on the floor of my apartment, drawing with her crayons while I was finishing a quilt. She looked up at me, her expression serious. "Grandma," she said, "Mommy told me you can fix anything that's broken." I smiled, my heart full. "I can fix most things, sweetie." She held up her drawing. It was a picture of a queen with a needle and thread for a scepter, standing in front of a small, cozy-looking house. "Mommy says you're not just a grandma," she announced proudly. "She says you're a hero." Tears welled in my eyes, but these were not tears of pain or loss. They were tears of pure, unadulterated peace. I had sought respect in the palaces of my son, only to find it in the crayon drawing of my grandchild. Some people spend their whole lives trying to build monuments of stone and glass to prove their worth. They don't understand that a true legacy isn't what you build for the world to see. It's the love and strength you sow into the hearts of the next generation. A tree that is ashamed of its roots cannot stand tall for long, because it's the dirt and the darkness below that give it the strength to reach for the sun. My roots are deep, and finally, I am standing in my own light.